Hello and welcome to Thursday's Live with Chug. My name is Neha Mahajan and I'm the Business Development and Outreach Manager here at Chug LLP Attorneys and CPAs. And joining me today from our Edison office is attorney, partner and attorney, Dia Matthews. Hi there, Dia. Welcome.
Hey, thanks, Neha. Great to be here.
Yeah. So, a very warm welcome to everybody who's joining us today, especially those who are joining us morning hours from the Pacific time zone. Thank you for joining in. And everybody else watching us from the East Coast, a very warm hello to you as well. Just want to reiterate, we're live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So if you have any questions for us today that you would want us to talk about, be sure to, submit them as comments or write to us, info@chug.com. Also, this discussion is for informational purposes only. This does not create an attorney-client relationship. Today, let's talk about, U.S. immigration options, especially for someone who's a foreign national entrepreneur, right? We discussed about EB-5 visa a few weeks ago, but this is not what we're talking about today. We're going to talk about the IEP program, or the startup visa as it's called. We're going to go into detail with that. We're going to talk about the L1B, L1 visas. And we are also going to talk about new office L1s. And also if, you're a foreign entity and you want to open an office in United States of America, what do you have to do, So we'll clarify all of that information with you. We have a lot of discuss and we only have about 30 minutes. So stay hooked on here with us. Dia, I want to get right into the discussion today. Foreign company, who wants to set up their offices in the United States of America, especially a new office, right? They've not had an office before. They're probably somewhere in the world and they want to open a new office. What are some of the key immigration regulations that they must consider?
Right. So we will focus on immigration requirements for new offices, right? Of course, when you set up a company in the US, whether it's a subsidiary or a branch or an affiliate, there's a lot of things that, you have to consider. Tax, corporate requirements, and then, of course, immigration if you're planning for L1 visas and such. So when it comes to L1 visas, generally the requirement is that there has to be a qualifying corporate relationship between the foreign company. Let's say you have a company in Canada or India or wherever. So there has to be a qualifying corporate relationship between that entity abroad and the entity that you have in the US. Secondly, the person who you are bringing, if it's going to be an L1A visa, then the person has to have at least 1 year of managerial experience with the overseas entity in the past 3 years. And if it's an L1B, which is usually for technical experts or people with a unique knowledge specific to your organization, then that person should have spent at least 1 year abroad working in a technical capacity or a specialized knowledge capacity with the entity abroad. So that's the requirement broadly for L1 visas. And then I think you want to talk today about the new office L1, right, Neha? So that's what you were asking about. So this is the new office is a subcategory within the L1. So certain, they relax the requirements a little bit because it's a new office L1.
Okay. All right. And Dia, when we are talking about the new office L1, what do companies have to do so that they can bring their existing employees to United States of America and make sure that their employees actually qualify for this particular category?
Yeah. So as I said, the new office is a certain, think of it as a certain category within the L1 scheme. The downside with the new office L1 visa is that it's only granted for 1 year. Okay. Yeah. But, you get more leeway. The US government knows that you're just setting up shop in the US. So one of the requirements when you're applying for an L1 is that you should not have been operational in the US for more than 1 year. Okay. So it's, if you can demonstrate that you're a new entity, you might have incorporated the US entity earlier, right? But if you're actually doing operations for less than 1 year, then you would qualify for the new office L1 filing. You have to have a physical office. I highly recommend that. Unfortunately, the regulations were drafted at a time when, virtual offices were not that common. So highly encourage clients to invest in a physical office. It doesn't have to be very large, but definitely one. And you need a business plan, because you want to show that you have thought about what you're going to be doing in the US. You have enough. You've thought about it. You have potential clients. The main requirement is that by the end of that 1 year, right, when the initial L1 visa is granted, the office in the US should be able to support a manager position. So that's generally what you have to show in the business plan, that you expect to grow in that 1 year, and that you will ultimately be able to support a manager or an executive in the US. So that's generally the requirement: the physical office, the business plan, and then of course the person that you're planning to bring to the US, the multinational executive or the expert, technical expert. That person should have spent at least 1 year with the entity abroad.
All right. So the rules are pretty simple. Actually.
Yes. With the new office, as I said, you don't already have an established business in the US. So the USCIS knows that you're just starting out, but they look to the entity that you have abroad, the business abroad, because you do have to show that you have a robust operation abroad, and that the person who is going to be coming to the US, the L1 candidate, L1A or L1B, depending on whether it's a manager or a specialized knowledge professional, right? That person should have spent at least 1 year abroad. So a lot of it is also showing the strength of your operations abroad, because you want to have that, you want to show that you are going to establish a credible business in the US. And most of it, is going to be backed by the entity abroad.
Right. Should these businesses have a certain amount of revenues, or
there's no revenue
specifications?
There's no revenue requirement as such. I mean, the US entity, the newly formed US entity, probably has not filed a tax return at the time that you're filing the new office L1 petition, right? Because it's new. But for the entity abroad, the qualifying entity abroad, you have to show proof of operations, tax returns, recommended, invoices and things like that. It's not required that the entity be profitable, but it has to be an operational entity. So that's, you might have different types of documentation to prove that, tax returns or invoices.
Yeah, so certainly have a robust operation, certainly have some number of employees who are directly working for you. And to open a new office, you definitely need to show a physical presence, not a virtual office, right? And a business plan.
Yes. Recommended.
Okay. All right, great. So when we talk about these employees on new office L1, right? The biggest question that comes to everybody's mind is, will they qualify for legal permanent residency or a green card? Is that even an option under new office L1?
Yeah. So the new office L1 visa is initially granted for a 1 year term, right? And then you can keep extending it in increments of 2 years for a maximum of 7 years. So that's the total time that you can be here in L1A status. And then if it's L1B, then it would be a maximum of 5 years, right? So within that time period, you can apply for the green card. So usually if it's, somebody who has been a manager abroad within the organization, then that person would qualify for the EB1C3, the multinational manager category. But you would only be able to apply for that after the US entity has been operational for at least 1 year. So normally we start the green card application only after the first extension has been approved. Because you want to show that the US entity has been operational for months at least.
Yeah, and is in a solid position to kind of retain the
Yeah, and actually, going back to the point that you mentioned earlier, is there are revenue requirements. So there is no revenue requirement or profitability requirement when it comes to L1 filing. But when you apply for a green card, you have to show that the petitioner, the US entity, has the ability to support the wage that will be paid. At that time, we have to review the financials more closely.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's important to remember, right? So if you are a foreign entity and you want to open your operations in the United States of America, follow us through. We're discussing all about it today. And, also the H-1B cap season started. this week, right? Was it yesterday? Or it was on March 1st, actually, right? Yeah. And if you're facing any issues, any hiccups in there, well, we are here to help you. info@chuk.com. We'll be able to guide you through the entire process without an issue. And also want to reiterate, we're live right now on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And if you have any questions for us, be sure to send it to us in the comment section or write to us, info@chuk.com. So pivoting from, the discussions that we've been having up until now, the Biden administration actually relaunched the International Entrepreneur Parole Program, the IEP, or the Startup Visa, as it is called. And this program, this International Entrepreneur Parole Program, it allows the owners and the managers of promising startups to temporarily reside in United States of America so that they can grow their business and also have a strong economic and, job creation potential. So, Dia, why don't you tell me more about this IEP program and the startup visa, as it's called, and who qualifies for it really? And then what does the eligibility look like for this program?
Sure. How much time do you have?
We can go on and on.
All right. Okay. All right. So, try to summarize it. The IEP has been around for a while, but it was only last year that the government announced that they would, actually process them. So now I think we've seen a surge in the interest for the IEP, the startup filings. First thing to keep in mind, it's parole. It's not really a visa. The way it is applied for and processed is a little different from the typical visas like the H or the L. The second thing is it's very new, so we don't really have any statistics from USCIS. In fact, just before the discussion today, I was checking if there are any updates, but they haven't. USCIS hasn't announced any processing time, so we actually have applications that we filed last year, and they are still not adjudicated. They are still pending with USCIS, and they haven't enabled premium processing for it. So, so we just have to wait and see. Going back to the requirements, so it is meant to serve the needs of startups, right? So companies, and the startup for IEP purposes is defined as a company that has been operational for less than 5 years in the US, should be an operational company, and should have attracted some interest. So the main thing is, it's unlike an EB-5, where you can just put in money into any kind of business and just show that, you're creating jobs. But with a startup, they're looking to promote companies which are new and which have the potential for sustained growth. There's requirements about, you have to show that the company is going to be, that the startup is going to contribute to the, economy. There are requirements as to fundraising. So this is what distinguishes the startup program from the other visa types. As one of the requirements, you have to show that the startup has received investment, funding from qualified investors, and there's a definition for that, or should have received government grants. And the amounts in question that they are, asking for are not very big. I mean, it's 250,000 in funding from U.S. investors, or 100,000 in grants from U.S. government entities. So that's the sort of entity that they wish to promote. And the funding from U.S. investors has to be from. So you have to trace the funding back to U.S. citizens or LPRs. So the funds which are investing should be owned majority by U.S. U.S. Citizens or LPRs.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So you spoke about grants. So this foreign entity that they want to open their operations here, and this IEP program.
This is not. Sorry to interrupt, but this is not related to any offshore entity, right?
Okay.
So this.
Okay, great.
This is focusing on startups in the US.
Perfect. So that's what I wanted to clarify there. Thank you for that. Because so these are the startups that are here in the United States of America, and they want to expand here, right here on US.
And they want to hire people, from abroad. That would be the entrepreneur. And one of the requirements, in fact, is that the entrepreneur should have at least a 10% shareholding. So the IEP applicant should have a minimum of 10% ownership in the startup in order to apply, and should also play a role in the operations.
So, does the visa status of the startup owner, does that matter at all in the dynamics of things?
The startup itself can be owned by, by others. It does not necessarily have to be U.S. citizens, but the entrepreneur, the applicant, has to have at least 10% ownership in the company.
Okay, and and he could be on, that person could be on any visa status, right? Or does it have to be a specific?
Currently in the US, could be a graduating student technically, or could be just, somebody abroad. But we also have to show that the person is going to bring some value to the startup, right? So, the person has to have some credentials. We have to talk about why the startup needs this particular person to work for it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So what happens to the dependents of this entrepreneur, right? What happens to when they apply for IEP? Do they get, classified as dependents?
Yeah. So that's one of the advantages with the US immigration system, right? I feel like they're pretty generous. Dependents get to come, just like with certain other visa types. This is not really a visa, it's a parole, but the spouse dependent can apply for work authorization. Children can also come, they can, legally come, but they cannot work.
Okay. All right. So, and what happens to pathway to citizenship through the startup visa program? Is there a pathway to citizenship for that and for the entrepreneur in question?
No. For that, for the citizenship, for green card, you would have to probably rely on certain other, there's no corollary. Based on this, so you would have to either apply for a perm-based green card or family-based, or maybe an EB-1 or something, something else.
Okay, all right, that's very interesting to know. And is there a validity attached to this IEP program, the startup visa program?
Yeah, so this is the initial parole for the IEP would be granted for 2.5 years. And you can get one extension for the same period. So a total of 5 years.
Okay. All right. And what happens after that 5 years?
You have to go back.
Oh, okay.
Or hopefully you've applied for, your green card, using one of the, green card categories. But there's no pathway to green card as you mentioned.
And is there any limit on how many entrepreneurs can apply for the IEP program in a particular year? Does USCIS specify a quota or a number of IEP programs that are available in a year?
I don't believe there's a quota. You have with the H-1B or anything, there's no quota. But the adjudication has been pretty scant, and as I said, we are still waiting to hear back on the cases that we filed last year. So I don't think there is any threat of IEPs taking over the immigration system or anything. There is, I think, you can only have three entrepreneurs per startup, if I'm not mistaken. I think there's a limit per startup, but overall, I don't think there is a quota that the US government has a limit or anything.
Okay. And all these entrepreneurs, do they need to belong to a certain domain, or it could be literally anything under the sun? I'm presuming in my head right now that this is only limited to high-tech startups, right? But I want you to answer that.
Yeah, I think in general, there's probably more high-tech startups, right? But the program doesn't discriminate. You can have any kind of startup. Does not have to be information technology or biotech or anything. There's no limitation. You can have any type of startup as long as it's attracted enough attention, has got external funding. Those are the requirements. So it could be anything. It could be like some sort of cooking program, or it could be anything.
Okay. And going back to funding, Dia, you mentioned that the funding has to be from a US citizen, or could this funding be derived from, say, a foreign entity or something?
Yeah, no. So that's the distinction. So you have to, the funding should be from qualified investors. And the qualified investor, it really boils down to, being a US citizen or LPR, or if it's an entity that is investing, then it has to be majority owned by US citizens and LPRs, lawful permanent.
Right. And does this particular program, does it require any specific amount of investment? Like, I'm comparing it to EB-5 right now in my head. So EB-5 requires a certain amount. Does this program also require a certain amount of investment?
Yes. The funding should be, it's a minimum of 250,000. When it's from a qualified investor, or 100,000 if it's from a government entity which is funding it, like a grant.
Yeah.
Which is very very reasonable, because most companies, if they're doing well, they will get funding much beyond that.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to be sure, anyone from any country can apply for this program in the United States of America.
Yes.
Am I right?
Yes, and that's the beauty of it, right? It doesn't discriminate. You have the E2, which is in some ways, I think people ask, well, why not do the E2? So not all countries are eligible for E2. For example, India doesn't qualify for the E2. So we have a lot of Indian nationals who are very interested in the IEP, and it's a good option for them if they qualify.
Yeah, and that was going to be my next question, actually. How does this IEP program, the International Entrepreneur Parole Program, compare to, say, an E2 treaty investor visa or even EB5? I know we dealt with the EB5 a little bit, but if you could just, give us an overview.
Yeah. So the E2 is also, treaty based. So you're talking about, an external, a foreign national coming in with their own money, right? You have to show that the person has invested money into a business in the US. So with the E2, you're allowing for foreign capital to come in. Whereas with the, startup, the basis of the IEP is a little different. As I said, it is really to promote the startups. And the way that they are identifying these startups which are eligible to hire foreign entrepreneurs is they look at whether the startup itself has attracted enough media attention, has received funding within the US. So you cannot just put in your own. If I wanted to apply for an IEP, I cannot put in my own money into the and say that, hey, I've put in 250,000, and now you have to actually show that the funding that the entity has received has been from qualified investors in the US.
So that's the important part. Yeah, that's the important part. It has to come from a trusted, verified source.
Yes, they want to say, when you talk about the startup ecosystem, right? What do these investors do? They're looking for companies that have the potential to grow, that they think have a good business idea, and they're investing in them. So those are the type of entities that the U.S. government wants to, enable them to sponsor these IEPs.
Yeah, we're just 8 minutes shy of ending this discussion today. So if you are watching us live, please send us your questions. We'll be taking some audience questions in a little while. And if you're watching us in a recorded version, well, you can send us your questions, info@chuk.com, and we'll still be able to help you. Just want to reiterate again, we're live on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And our partner and attorney, Ms. Dia Matthews, has joined us from our Edison office. And we're talking about the International Entrepreneur Parole Program, the IEP, or the Startup Visa, as it's commonly called. We discussed the E2 treaty investor visa and the EB5 and the comparison with the IEP. How does this IEP program compare to, say, the L1 visa? Yeah. So with the L1, there is no capital investment requirement, right? It's just the relationship between the overseas company and the US company. And the L1 applicant should have the managerial or the specialized knowledge experience with the overseas company. With the startup visa or the IEP, on the other hand, there is no requirement as to offshore experience, within the same organization or anything. As I mentioned before, it could be, a graduate, a recent graduate, a foreign student in the US who's just graduated and maybe has the skills or the, capacity to be able to contribute to the startup. So, startup has no dependency on any overseas company or any sort of overseas experience. It's really just to, enable startups in the US to hire according to their needs. Right. Okay. And we do have a question from the audience. This one's coming from Mubashir Ahmed, and he's asking, how much investment is needed for Canadian citizens?
What is this, for which visa type?
For IEP, I think he's asking for IEP. And what
so
kind
again,
of...
going back, so again, it's not that the IEP applicant can put in the investment amount, right? There is, first if you're putting in any investment amount from Canada, that probably will not help the startup because, as I mentioned before, you have to show that the startup has received funding from investors, qualified investors within the US. So you cannot pump in money, your own money from abroad or, within the US and say that, now I qualify. That's not how it works.
Okay, so it has to be from an investor on US soil who is a US citizen.
Yes.
Okay, we have another question from Krishna Kumar, and he's asking, you may have covered earlier, but how much does one have to invest to qualify for the investor visa? He's asking what's the minimum amount that's required.
So he's not asking about IEP, right? Because again, IEP, as I said, is not investment based. It is really funding based. You're using, you have an entity in the US, a startup, a relatively younger company under 5 years, and you have to show that that company has received funding from qualified investors, right? That's the whole basis of, the whole IEP program. So such a company which has received funding in the last 18 months can then sponsor an entrepreneur who has at least 10% stake in the company and will be coming here to play a significant role in the operations of the company. So that's, in a nutshell, what we are looking at. You might have $500,000 or $1 million or whatever to invest into that entity, but that will not qualify you for the IEP. Maybe you could look at the EB5 program if that's the case.
Yeah, I hope that answers your question, Krishna and Mubashir. We also have just about 4 minutes left, so I'm going to get into another question. So there's this question from Anonymous, doesn't have his name here. Can I apply if I have overstayed the term of my non-immigrant status, but I believe I fulfill the other criteria of the IEP rule?
Yeah, so with the IEP, you might have to exit the US. And also the way the IEP is designed, as I mentioned, there's along with the IEP, there is an advanced parole application, and they talk about scheduling biometrics abroad, and then you have to apply at the port of entry. So there is a process to be completed overseas after this is done. So for somebody who's violated the terms, I mean, like if it's an overstay, then that person will probably have to exit the US and apply, through consular. But again, keep in mind that it depends on how much you've overstayed. I mean, if the overstay is over more than 180 days, then there could be ramifications, with exiting. Yeah, so that's something we discussed with an attorney in detail before.
Right. And another question is, can I hold a valid non-immigrant visa and be an entrepreneur parolee at the same time? Is that a possibility?
No, you hold one status. I mean, either, at any point of time, you would have just one immigration status, right? So, you can either have an L or an H, or you can have the IEP, the parole status, but cannot have two types at the same time. You'll give up one.
Yeah, and we have another question. Where can I find the exact requirements for the IEP program? I would say USCIS website. Is that right?
Yeah, the website has it, and it's pretty user friendly. I think it's pretty clear what the requirements are. I think the challenge sometimes is getting the necessary documentation. So we have startups that come and they have all this funding. But sometimes it's difficult to show, because you have to show that the majority of the funding has been, just being traced back to US citizens or LPRs. And with most of the bigger funds, how do you get that information, right? So that's sometimes a little bit of a challenge, but the requirements are there on the USCIS website.
All right. Thank you, Dia. And then this question is, if I'm an applicant outside the United States of America, how do I collect my biometrics?
This is So they the instructions say that they will let us know how the biometrics are to be captured. I don't know if they will waive it now with the pandemic and everything, but that's what it says, that they'll schedule the biometrics abroad.
Right. I think thank you everybody for joining us today. We are in the last leg of our discussion today. And thank you, Dia. I mean, we went in quite a detail about this whole startup visa, and what is it that you can do to qualify for it. If you have any questions for us, Dia Matthews, our partner attorney, she'll be more than happy to help you. Send us an email at info@chuk.com if you want to set up a consult, or if you want to know more about the startup visa program and want to see if you qualify for it or not. We'd be more than happy to assist you. And until next time, then we will see you Thursday. Every Thursday, we go live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook, 2 o'clock Eastern Time and 11 a.m. Pacific Time. Next week, we'll be back with another set of questions, another topic with another attorney or a CPA. You'll have to hang around to find out who that is. And you may as well subscribe to one of our channels, either LinkedIn, YouTube, or Facebook, and find out what we're going to talk about next week. So until next week, stay safe and sound. Dia, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Neha. Great.